They laughed at the old woman for fencing her house with giant logs when they discovered the reason. Margaret Henderson never imagined that at 68 years old she would become the most controversial topic in the small town of Aspen. The retiree had lived for decades in silence in that same corner house, known to everyone as a reserved woman, but always polite with her neighbors. It was on a freezing July morning that everything began to change. Margaret hired a construction company to start a project that would leave the entire neighborhood stunned. She wanted to completely fence her property with enormous wooden logs, creating a 3-meter-high barrier around the entire house. The first truck arrived at 6 in the morning, loaded with logs as thick as telephone poles. Margaret was outside, wearing her usual red coat and a grey wool hat, supervising every movement of the workers. Her determined eyes missed no detail. Miss Dorothy, her neighbor for more than 20 years, watched from her window, unable to believe what she was seeing. "What is this madness, Margaret?" she shouted over the low fence that separated the two properties. "Good morning, Dorothy. I'm just making some improvements to the house," replied Margaret without stopping from pointing out instructions to the workers. "Improvements? This looks like a prison. Are you going to lock yourself in there?" Margaret didn't answer. She continued watching the crane position each log with millimeter precision. There was something in her eyes that Dorothy had never seen before, a mix of determination and a deep sadness she couldn't decipher. Throughout that first week, the construction progressed rapidly. Margaret woke up before the workers and only went inside after they left. Her fingers were always cold from the chill, but she refused to leave the site. "Are you sure you want it this high?" asked Frank, the construction foreman. 3 meters is very high. It will be hard to even see the street from inside the house." "That's exactly the idea," replied Margaret, adjusting her hat better on her head. Frank exchanged looks with his companions. In 20 years in the business, he had never seen anything like it. But the money was guaranteed, and the lady seemed to know exactly what she wanted. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Gradually, small groups began to form on the sidewalk in front of Margaret's house. People walked by slowly, commenting and making jokes. "She's turning paranoid in her old age," said Mr. Harold from the corner bar. "She must be afraid of burglars," speculated Mrs. Betty. "Or hiding something valuable in there," whispered Mrs. Linda, always ready to spread gossip. Margaret heard everything, but pretended not to care. Her firm steps didn't falter as she walked back and forth, checking if each log was perfectly aligned. In the second week, the jokes became crueler. Someone started calling her house Fort Apache, and the nickname stuck. Children would pass by shouting "Crazy Grandma" and running away before she could see them. That's when her son David showed up. "Mom, what is this nonsense?" he exploded as soon as he got out of the car. David was 42 years old and worked as a civil engineer in New York. It had been 3 months since he'd visited his mother, always too busy with his projects in the capital. "Hi, son. How was the trip?" Margaret tried to smile, but the tension was visible. "Don't give me that, Mom. I got at least 5 calls from neighbors saying you're doing something crazy here. What is this?" Margaret looked at the logs already installed, which formed an imposing barrier around half the property. "It's a fence, David. That's all. That's all. Mum, this looks like a fortress. You're isolating yourself from the whole world. This isn't normal." "Normal for whom?" Margaret's voice came out harsher than she intended. "I have the right to do whatever I want in my own house." "Of course you have the right, but this is costing a fortune. Did you spend your savings on this?" Margaret didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. David ran his hand through his hair, exasperated. His mother had always been a practical, frugal person. Seeing her spend everything on a pointless construction genuinely worried him. "Mom, at least explain to me why you're doing this. Is there a specific reason?" "There is, but it's none of your business." Those words cut David like a blade. His mother had never spoken to him like that. They had always been close, especially after his father passed away 8 years ago. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "None of my business? Mum, I'm your son. I'm worried about you." "Worried enough to not show up here for 3 months, Margaret retorted. The phrase hit David squarely. It was true. Lately he had distanced himself, buried in work and his own life's problems. His wife Jennifer was pregnant with their second child, and he was stressed about the financial responsibilities. "That's different, Mom. You know I'm busy, but whenever you need me, you just have to call, and I'll come." "Really? And when was the last time I called saying I needed anything?" David fell silent. His mother was right. She never asked for help, never complained, never bothered him. She had always been independent and proud. "All right," he said, trying a different approach. "Then tell me why you're building this. What's the reason?" Margaret looked into her son's eyes. For a moment, it seemed she was going to confess something important, but then she shook her head. "I'm protecting something very precious, that's all I can say." "Protecting what? Money? Grandma's jewels? Mom, if you have something valuable there, it's better to put it in the bank." "It's nothing a bank can keep, son." Margaret's mysterious answer only increased David's curiosity and worry. He decided to stay in town for a few days to try to understand what was happening. That night during dinner, the tension between mother and son was palpable. Margaret had prepared her famous lasagna, trying to create a more welcoming atmosphere, but David barely touched his food. "Mom, have you been going to the doctor regularly?" "Of course I have. I'm in good health, if that's what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I just want to make sure you're okay." "Up here." He pointed to his own head. Margaret put her fork down on the plate forcefully. "You think I'm crazy?" "I didn't say that. But you have to admit this behavior is strange. You've always been so level-headed." "And I still am. Just because I'm making a decision you don't understand doesn't mean I've lost my mind." "You who?" "You, Jennifer, the whole neighborhood. Everyone thinks they know what's best for me." David realized he had inadvertently mentioned Jennifer. His wife had indeed commented about the mother-in-law's strange phase when he told her about the construction. "Jennifer didn't say anything out of line. She's just worried too." "I'm sure she is." Margaret's tone carried an irony David couldn't interpret. The next morning, David woke up early and found his mother already dressed, having coffee and preparing for another day of supervising the construction. "Mom, can I make a proposal?" "Go ahead." "What if you pause this construction for a week, just so we can talk about it better? We could travel together, visit some places you like. So I forget this madness and go back to being the well-behaved little old lady everyone expects." "That's not it." "Yes, it is, David. You want me to go back to my small, quiet life without bothering anyone." Margaret stood up from the table and went to the window. Outside, the workers were already arriving. "Son, I spent my whole life being the person everyone expected me to be. The dedicated wife, the present mother, the polite neighbor. Now I want to do something for myself. For the first time in my life, I want to do exactly what I believe needs to be done." "But what, Mom? What needs to be done?" Margaret turned to him with eyes shining with unshed tears. "To protect the most important thing I have, the only thing that really matters." David tried once more. "Then show me. Let me help. If it's so important, why can't I know?" "Because you won't understand. Nobody understands." This conversation repeated itself several times in the following days. David tried different approaches, sometimes being understanding, sometimes being firmer, but Margaret remained unyielding. At the end of the week, Jennifer arrived to pick up her husband. She was 6 months pregnant and the trip from New York had been tiring. "Hi, Mom," she greeted, trying to sound cheerful despite the obvious unease at the sight of the construction. "Jennifer, my dear, how are you feeling?" "Well, thank you, and you, how have you been?" The question sounded forced, and Margaret noticed immediately. "I'm great. Busy with my project, but great." Jennifer looked at her husband, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. During lunch, she tried a different approach. "Mom, I've been thinking, with the baby coming, it would be good if you thought about moving closer to us. That way you could help with the children, and we could take better care of you too." Margaret stopped eating. "Have you two already talked about this?" "We've just discussed the possibility," David replied quickly. "I see, and you think I can't take care of myself anymore?" "That's not it, Mom," Jennifer tried to correct. "It's just that you're here alone, and with this construction, it seems like you're isolating yourself more and more." "This is my home, Jennifer. I was born in this town. I got married in this house. I raised my son here. I don't intend to leave." "But Mom, what will you do when you get older? What if you need help?" "I'll deal with that when the time comes. For now, I'm fine where I am." The tension in the air was almost palpable. Jennifer and David exchanged glances, clearly frustrated with Margaret's stubbornness. "Mom," David tried once more, "you have to admit this attitude is affecting the whole family. Our daughter Emily doesn't even want to visit Grandma anymore." This information hurt Margaret more than she wanted to show. Emily, her 16-year-old granddaughter, had always been her darling. Knowing the girl was ashamed of her felt like a stab in the heart. "Emily said that? She's at a difficult age. You know how teenagers are. But she mentioned she doesn't want her friends to see Grandma's house like this." Margaret nodded slowly, trying not to show how much those words hurt her. "I understand. She has a right to feel that way." "No, Mom." David realized he had been too cruel. "She doesn't have a right. It's just a phase, but maybe if you explain to her—" "No. I won't explain anything to anyone. Do what you want. Say I'm crazy, that I'm having a breakdown, that I've lost my mind. But I won't stop." Jennifer and David returned to New York that same day, more worried than when they had arrived. During the entire trip, they discussed what to do. "David, your mother needs professional help," said Jennifer. "This behavior isn't normal." "I know, but she refuses to talk, and technically she's lucid. I can't commit her against her will." "Yes, you can. There are legal ways. If she's spending all her savings on a pointless construction, that can be considered a sign she's not in a condition to make financial decisions." David shook his head, uncomfortable with the idea. "I'm not putting my mother in a facility, at least not yet." "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to wait. Maybe when the construction is finished, she'll go back to normal." But things were far from going back to normal. In fact, they were going to get much worse before they got better. With David back in New York, Margaret found herself alone again with her construction. The workers labored in silence, respecting her reserved manner, but she noticed their curious glances. Frank, the foreman, was a man of few words but observant. He had noticed some strange behaviors from Margaret that intrigued him. Whenever the work approached a specific area of the backyard, she became visibly nervous. She always carried a small metal box, and when no one was looking, he saw her storing colorful objects inside it. One Wednesday afternoon, while the other workers were at lunch, Frank decided to ask a question. "Mrs. Henderson, can I say something?" "Of course, Frank. You always get nervous when we work near that area back there. Is there a problem with the ground? A pipe? Buried wiring?" Margaret looked to where he pointed. It was exactly the corner of the yard she most protected. "No, there's no infrastructure there." "Then why are you so worried?" Margaret hesitated. Frank seemed like a decent man, an honest worker. During the weeks together, she had noticed he treated the work with care and respect. "There are some things buried there, things that are important to me." "I see. Family treasures." "Something like that?" Frank nodded respectfully. "Don't worry. We won't touch anything that isn't necessary. And if we need to dig nearby, you can oversee everything closely." "Thank you, Frank. That's very important to me." That night, Margaret had trouble sleeping. Thinking about that corner of the yard always stirred memories she tried to keep locked away. She got out of bed and went to the window. Even with the posts already installed around much of the perimeter, she could still see the area she protected so carefully. Her eyes filled with tears when she remembered the first time she had dug a hole there. 16 years ago when she buried Max. Max had been a golden Labrador, special in a way few knew. Margaret had trained him personally to be a guide dog, part of volunteer work she had kept secret for decades. Few people in town knew Margaret had this specialty. She had learned the training techniques when she was younger, after a course she took in New York in the 1980s. Since then, she had discreetly trained dozens of dogs for people with visual impairments. Max had been one of the most special, intelligent, obedient, affectionate. She had trained him for a little girl named Sarah. who at the time was just 7 years old and had lost her sight due to a genetic disease. The day Max left was still the most painful in Margaret's memory. He had saved Sarah from being hit by a truck, pushing her out of the way at the last second. The impact that struck him was fatal. Margaret wiped away her tears. It wasn't just Max buried in that corner of the yard. Over the years, other dogs she trained had ended up being buried there when their lives came to an end. Their owners, grateful for the service provided, always asked if she could take care of the final moments and the final rest of those special companions. The backyard of Margaret's house had secretly become a small cemetery for guide dogs. Each had a small, discreet marker, just a painted stone with the name and dates. That's what she kept in the metal box, the small, colorful stones that marked each grave. To anyone who didn't know the story, it would seem like just the eccentricity of a sentimental old woman who liked animals too much. But to Margaret, it was much more than that. It was the preservation of the memory of dogs who dedicated their lives to helping other people, and the real reason for building the fence was yet to be revealed. The next morning, Margaret was awakened by the sound of raised voices in the street. She put on her robe and went to the front window to see what was happening. A small group of neighbors was standing on the sidewalk in front of her house, talking animatedly. Among them, she recognized Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Harold, Mrs. Betty, and a few other people from the neighborhood. "This has become a circus," Mr. Harold was saying. "The woman has lost her mind." "Someone needs to do something," Mrs. Betty agreed. "This is turning the whole neighborhood into a laughingstock." Margaret dressed quickly and went outside. The neighbors fell silent when they saw her approach. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted politely. "Good morning, Margaret," replied Mrs. Dorothy, visibly embarrassed. "We were just talking. About my fence, I imagine." "Look, Margaret," Mr. Harold took a step forward. "We don't want to meddle in your life, but this is getting ridiculous. People from all over town are coming here just to see Fort Apache." "Fort Apache? That's what they're calling your house," explained Mrs. Betty. "Just yesterday a tour bus passed by here. A whole bus of people taking pictures of your fence." Margaret felt her face burn with shame. She hadn't imagined the situation had reached this point. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'm building something on my own property." "But why?" insisted Mrs. Dorothy. "Margaret, you've always been such a normal, sensible person. What happened?" "Nothing happened. I just decided to make some changes." "Changes?" Mr. Harold shook his head. "This isn't changes, Margaret. This is a fortress. Who are you hiding from?" "I'm not hiding from anyone." "Then why are you isolating yourself like this?" asked Mrs. Betty. "This isn't normal." Margaret looked at the faces around her, people she had known for decades, with whom she had shared good and bad times of life in the town. Now they all looked at her as if she were a stranger. "You don't need to understand my reasons, you just need to respect me." "Of course we respect you, Margaret." Mrs. Dorothy tried to sound conciliatory. "That's exactly why we're worried. You're not acting like you." "Like me?" "And how do I act, Dorothy?" "Well, you've always been balanced, discreet, a normal person. And now I'm not normal anymore." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Margaret looked at each of the neighbors and saw the same expression, pity mixed with embarrassment. "I see," she said finally. "Thank you for your concern. Now I need to get back to my construction." She turned to go inside, but Mr. Harold's voice made her stop. "Margaret, this can't go on like this. If you don't stop this madness, we'll have to take action." "What kind of action?" "The Homeowners Association is already looking into suing you for visual pollution, and some people are talking about calling the city hall." "Do whatever you want," Margaret replied, without turning around. "I have every legal right to build a fence on my property." She went inside and closed the door, but leaned against the wall, trying to control the trembling in her hands. She knew the neighbors meant well, but they couldn't understand that she had deep reasons for that construction. She also knew the social pressure was only just beginning. That afternoon, a young journalist named Andrew Mitchell appeared at Margaret's door. He worked for the local newspaper and had been sent to do a story on the eccentric construction that's stirring up the city. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Margaret. My name is Andrew. I'm from the Aspen Daily News. I'd like to ask a few questions about your construction." Margaret watched him through the gate. He was a young man, maybe around 25, with a smile that tried to seem friendly, but she sensed it hid other intentions. "I have nothing to say to the press. Wouldn't you like to explain your reasons? Give your side of the story?" "There's no story to explain. I'm building a fence, that's all." "But Mrs. Margaret, you have to admit it's a rather unusual fence. Why giant logs? Why so tall? Why do you want to know?" "The public is curious. Your construction has become a tourist attraction. Don't you think you owe the community an explanation?" "I don't owe anyone an explanation for what I do at my home." Andrew insisted for a few minutes, but Margaret remained unyielding. In the end, he left visibly frustrated for not getting the interview he wanted. 2 days later, the newspaper published a story with the headline, "Grandma's Fortress. Elderly woman builds giant fence and becomes attraction in Aspen." The text, while not offensive, had a clearly mocking tone. The story described the construction as a 3-meter-high fence made of gigantic logs and mentioned that the elderly woman refuses to explain the reasons for the project, generating speculation among the neighbors. The journalist had interviewed some local residents who gave various opinions on the situation. Mr. Harold was quoted saying that the construction is causing embarrassment in the neighborhood, while Mrs. Dorothy declared she was worried about the neighbors' mental state. The most painful part for Margaret was reading that her own family had been contacted. David had given a statement saying that the family is trying to talk to the lady to understand the reasons for the construction. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When Margaret read the story, she felt a mix of anger and sadness she couldn't express. Her privacy had been invaded, her family had been publicly embarrassed, and she had become a laughingstock for the whole town. But this didn't make her give up. On the contrary, it strengthened her determination. That week, something happened that Margaret didn't expect. Frank arrived at the construction site earlier than usual and found her crying silently while looking at the logs already installed. "Mrs. Margaret, is everything all right?" She quickly wiped her tears. "Yes, Frank. I was just checking the progress of the work. Did you read the newspaper?" Margaret nodded. "I did. What an injustice, right? People talk without knowing the whole story." "They certainly do." Frank was silent for a few moments, then decided to say what he was thinking. "Mrs. Margaret, I don't know what your reason is for this construction, but I can say that in 20 years in this profession, I've never seen someone so dedicated to a project. You oversee every detail, know every measurement. You're always here making sure everything turns out perfect. And that's not something a crazy person does. A crazy person does things without thinking. You've thought through every detail of this project. You have an important reason, I'm sure of it." These words touched Margaret deeply. It was the first time in weeks someone had spoken to her without judgment. "Thank you, Frank. You don't need to thank me. I'm just telling the truth." That night, Margaret received a call from David. He had read the newspaper story and was furious. "Mom, this was in the paper. Our family has become a joke." "I saw the story, David. How can you be so calm? This is humiliating. Jennifer is embarrassed. Emily doesn't even want to talk about her grandma at school anymore." Margaret closed her eyes. The pain of knowing she was causing suffering for her family was almost unbearable. "Mom, this has to stop. I can't take it anymore." "David, no. You are going to stop this construction now, or I will take action." "What kind of action?" "I will get a court order to have you committed to a psychiatric clinic." The threat hit Margaret like a gunshot. Her own son was willing to have her committed by force. "You would do that to me?" "If it's necessary to protect you from yourself, yes." "David, I am not crazy." "You're not? Then explain it to me. Give me one sensible reason for this construction. A reason any normal person would understand." Margaret fell silent. There were so many things she wanted to say, so many truths she wanted to share, but she knew that in that moment of anger, David would not be able to understand. "I love you, son, but I won't stop." "Then you will have to deal with the consequences." David hung up the phone. leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts and her tears. The following week, Margaret began to receive anonymous letters. The first arrived on a Monday morning, in a plain envelope with no return address. "Mrs. Margaret, please stop this foolishness. We are all civilized neighbors in this neighborhood, and your attitude is harming our community's image. Go back to being the sensible person you always were. Signed, a concerned neighbor." The second letter came 2 days later. "Mrs. Margaret, we all know you have always been a good person, but this construction is bothering everyone. Please have some consideration for the neighbors and stop it. We don't want to have to take more drastic measures. A neighbor who respects you." The letters kept coming almost daily. Some were polite, others more harsh. One went so far as to suggest she seek medical help before it's too late. Each letter that arrived was like a stab to Margaret's heart. People she had known for decades, who had shared important moments of her life, now treated her like a troublesome stranger. But the worst part was the isolation. The casual conversations at the bakery stopped. When she went to the market, she noticed the whispers and stares. Some acquaintances would simply cross the street when they saw her coming. Margaret had become a persona non grata in her own town. One Thursday afternoon, when the construction was nearly finished, something happened that almost made Margaret give up on everything. She was returning from the market when she saw her granddaughter Emily in the town square with a group of friends. At first, she was happy to see the girl, who hadn't visited in over a month. "Emily!" she called, waving. The 16-year-old girl looked in her grandmother's direction, became visibly embarrassed, and said something to her friends. The whole group laughed, and they quickly walked away in the opposite direction. Margaret stood still in the middle of the square, feeling as if she had been punched in the stomach. Her own granddaughter was ashamed of her. That night, she called David. "Son, can I speak with Emily?" "Mom, she doesn't want to talk to you right now." "Please, David, just a few minutes." "You really hurt the girl. She said she's ashamed of her crazy grandma." "She really said that?" "She did. And can you blame her? A 16-year-old girl with all that social pressure at school, and her grandma becomes the laughingstock of the whole town." Margaret felt the tears stream down her face. "I never meant to hurt anyone." "Then stop this madness. That's all you need to do. Stop. Go back to being the mom and grandma we know." "I can't, David." "Why? In God's name, why?" "Because—" Margaret hesitated, almost telling the whole truth, but then she shook her head. "Because it's important." "Important to whom?" "You're destroying the family over some importance that nobody understands." "One day you'll understand." "When? When you're in a psychiatric clinic?" The threat resurfaced, and Margaret realized David was getting more serious about it. "Good night, son." She hung up the phone and went to the window. Outside, the posts formed an almost complete barrier around her property. In a few more days, the work would be finished. But at what cost? She had lost the neighbors' trust, the community's respect, and was about to lose her own family. Was it worth it? Margaret looked toward the back corner of the yard, where her special dogs rested peacefully. For a moment, she doubted herself. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was truly overreacting. But then she remembered Max and Sarah and all the other dogs who had dedicated their lives to helping people in need. She remembered the letters she secretly received from people thanking her for the work she did. No, she wasn't overreacting. She was protecting something sacred. The next morning, Margaret woke to the sound of a siren. She looked out the window and saw a fire truck parked on the street, with several uniformed men observing her construction. She dressed quickly and went out to see what was happening. "Good morning," she greeted the fire chief. "Mrs. Margaret Henderson?" "Yes, that's me." "I'm Commander Williams. We received a complaint about irregularities in your construction. May we take a look?" "What kind of irregularities?" "Reports about structural risks, lack of proper permits. We need to verify if everything is in order." Margaret knew the construction was technically correct. Frank was a competent professional and had followed all technical standards. But she also knew there might be bureaucratic issues that hadn't been properly resolved. Of course, you may check. The firefighters spent 2 hours examining the construction. They measured, photographed, took notes. In the end, Commander Williams came to speak with Margaret. Mrs. Henderson, structurally the work is correct, but there are some bureaucratic matters that need to be resolved. What kind of matters? Do you have a permit from the city for this construction? Margaret hesitated. In fact, she hadn't applied for a permit, assuming a fence didn't need special authorization. I didn't apply for a specific permit. Well, that's the problem. A construction of this height and magnitude requires a permit. Without it, the city can demand its demolition. The word demolition hit Margaret like a lightning bolt. After all she had been through, the possibility of losing her fence was devastating. What do I need to do? Go to the city hall, file the paperwork, pay the fees. But I'll be frank with you. With all this controversy, it will be difficult to get approval. The firefighters left, leaving Margaret with yet another problem to solve. She needed legal help, and that meant more expenses in an already tight financial situation. That afternoon, she called a lawyer who had represented her late husband in some business matters. "Attorney Henry, I need help with a legal issue." "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. What is it about?" When she explained the situation, the lawyer was silent for a few moments. "Mrs. Henderson, I'll be frank. With all this negative backlash, it will be very difficult to get retroactive approval. The City Hall is under pressure to act." "But I have the right to build a fence on my property, don't I?" "You do, but within legal norms, and honestly, a 3-meter-high fence can be considered excessive." "What does that mean?" "It means we can try, but the chances of success are small, and it will be expensive." Margaret swallowed hard. Her savings were already nearly exhausted from the construction. How much would it cost? To file all the legal proceedings, at least 15,000 Rs, with no guarantee of success. It was exactly the money Margaret still had saved for emergencies, her last money. "Attorney Henry, if I do nothing, what happens?" "The City Hall can file for a demolition order. In that case, besides tearing down the fence, you would also have to pay the legal costs and the fine." Margaret found herself at a crossroads: spend her last money on an uncertain legal battle, or see her life's work demolished. "I need to think." "Of course, Mrs. Margaret, but don't take too long. These situations tend to resolve quickly when there's public pressure." That night, Margaret barely slept. For the first time since the construction began, she started to wonder if all that suffering was really worth it. She was losing her family, her friends, her reputation, her money, and now she might lose the very work for which she had sacrificed everything. The next day, something happened that would completely change the course of the story. Margaret was in the kitchen drinking coffee and trying to decide what to do when she heard the gate slam. She looked out the window and saw a young woman standing at the entrance, accompanied by a guide dog. Her heart almost stopped. It was Sarah. The girl Max had saved 16 years ago was now a 23-year-old woman. Margaret recognized her immediately, even after all that time. The brown hair, the delicate face, and especially the eyes that, despite not seeing, had a look of determination Margaret had never forgotten. Margaret ran to the gate. "Sarah? Mrs. Margaret?" The young woman smiled. "I knew you'd recognize my voice." "My dear, what are you doing here?" "I read in the papers about the controversy over your fence. I need to speak with you." Margaret quickly opened the gate. "Of course, come in. Would you like some coffee, water? How are you?" "I'm well, Mrs. Margaret. Actually, I'm great." They sat on the porch, and Margaret could observe Sarah better. She had become a beautiful woman, well-dressed, with a confident bearing that contrasted with the frightened little girl from years past. "Sarah, where are you living now?" "In New York. I'm a professional pianist." "A pianist? How wonderful. And I owe so much of that to you, and to Max." Upon hearing the dog's name, Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. "You still remember him?" "I remember everything, Mrs. Margaret. The day of the accident, how he saved me, how you took care of me afterward." Margaret shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just fulfilled my duty." "Duty?" Sarah laughed. "Mrs. Margaret, you trained Max for 2 years to be my guide dog, without charging a thing. You dedicated your time, your home, your life so that I could have independence. It was what I loved to do. And you still love it, I'm sure. That's why I'm here." Sarah leaned forward. "Mrs. Margaret, I read about the controversy over your fence in the newspaper. I saw that people are criticizing it, that your family doesn't understand. But I understand." "Understand what?" "Why you are building this protection. It's because of the cemetery, isn't it?" Margaret was shocked. How did Sarah know? "How did you—" "Mrs. Margaret, after Max died saving my life, you told me he would be buried in your backyard, along with other special dogs you had trained. I was a child, but I never forgot." "You remember that?" "I remember everything, and I also remember you said that one day you would do something to protect that special place, so that no one would ever disturb the rest of those heroes." Margaret began to cry silently. It was the first time in months that someone truly understood what she was doing. "Sarah, you don't need to explain anything. I know exactly why you're doing this. And I came here to help." "Help? How?" Sarah smiled. "Mrs. Margaret, do you know that after the accident I became a public figure? I give concerts, I have a name in classical music." "I didn't know." "Well, I do, and I have influence, contacts, resources. I came here to publicly tell the truth about you, so everyone knows that the crazy old lady is actually a heroine." Margaret shook her head. "Sarah, you don't need to do this. I don't want to create more controversy. Mrs. Margaret, you've spent your whole life helping people like me in silence. You trained dozens of guide dogs, changed the lives of dozens of people, and never asked for anything in return. You never wanted recognition, never wanted fame. But now you're being unfairly attacked, and I won't stay silent." "But Sarah—" "No buts, Mrs. Margaret. You deserve respect, and that cemetery deserves protection. What you're doing is beautiful, it's noble, it's necessary." Sarah stood up. "Can I see the cemetery?" Margaret hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Come with me." They walked to the back of the yard. Sarah followed with her current guide dog, a German shepherd named Thor, who obediently guided her along the property's paths. When they reached the corner where the dogs were buried, Margaret opened her metal box and showed the small coloured stones. "Each one marks a grave," she explained. "Max is here, right in the centre." Sarah knelt on the ground and gently touched the earth. "Max, my dear friend, thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a life." She stayed silent for a few moments, clearly moved. When she stood up, she was determined. "Mrs. Margaret, can I use your phone? I need to make some calls." "Of course, but to whom?" "To some journalists I know, to the city mayor, who is a fan of mine, and to some influential people who can help resolve this situation." "Sarah, are you sure? I don't want you getting involved in a controversy because of me." "Mrs. Margaret, after everything you've done for me, it's the least I can do. Besides, it's not just for you. It's for all those dogs who dedicated their lives to helping people like me. They deserve to have their memory protected." Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon making calls. Margaret only heard bits of the conversations, but she noticed the young woman spoke with authority and conviction. "Yes, it's really me, Sarah Henderson. No, it's not a mistake. It's about the article that came out in the newspaper. I need to tell the truth about this woman." "Mayor, this is Sarah Henderson." "Yes, the pianist. I need to speak with you about an injustice happening in our city." "Doctor, Edward, it's Sarah. I need a favor. A legal matter involving a very special person." By the end of the afternoon, Sarah had mobilized a real support network. Journalists interested in the story, lawyers willing to help for free, and even a councilman who promised to intervene on the permit issue. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me, Mrs. Margaret. You just need to trust me. Tomorrow, things will start to change." That night, Sarah stayed at Margaret's house. They talked late into the night, reminiscing about the old days and catching up. "Mrs. Margaret, can I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you never tell your family about the guide dog work? Why did you keep it a secret?" Margaret thought for a moment. "At first it was just a hobby. Then it became a passion. But I was always afraid people wouldn't understand, or that they'd think I was doing it for attention. And you weren't? Never. I did it because I liked helping, because I saw the difference those dogs made in people's lives. It was rewarding. And why did you stop training? I didn't stop completely. I still train a few, but less than before. Age is catching up, and it's work that demands a lot physically. But you could train other people to continue the work. Yes, I could, Sarah smiled. Then we have another project to discuss after we resolve the fence issue. The next morning, Margaret's life began to change drastically. First came the journalist Andrew Mitchell, the same one who had written the mocking article about her. But now he came with a completely different attitude. Mrs. Margaret, I've come to apologize for the previous article. I didn't know the true story behind your construction. Sarah had spoken with Andrew the night before, telling him the whole truth about Margaret's work and the real meaning of that cemetery. I would like to write a new article, this time telling the truth. Would you agree to an interview? Margaret looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. I accept, but I want Sarah to participate too. Of course. In fact, that will be even better. An article about Mrs. Margaret told by the person she helped. It will be moving. The interview lasted 2 hours. Sarah recounted in detail the accident, about how Max saved her by sacrificing his own life, and about how Margaret supported her throughout the period of adapting to her new reality. Mrs. Margaret isn't just a dog trainer, explained Sarah. She is a person who dedicated her life to helping others without asking for anything in return. That fence isn't eccentricity, it's protection for a sacred place. Margaret, in turn, explained her work over the decades in detail. I trained 47 guide dogs over 25 years. Each one changed the life of a person with visual impairment. Some, like Max, literally gave their lives to protect their human companions. And why did you keep this a secret? Asked Andrew. Because I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I believed in the importance of the work. Recognition was never the goal. But now that you're being unfairly attacked, don't you think people deserve to know the truth? I think Sarah is right. People deserve to know why that place is special, why it needs to be protected. The article was published in the Sunday edition of the newspaper, featured on the front page, The True Story of the Crazy Fence. Elderly woman protects cemetery of heroic guide dogs. The impact was immediate. Mrs. Dorothy was the first to knock on Margaret's door that Sunday morning. Margaret, dear, I just read the newspaper. Why did you never tell us? Hi, Dorothy. Would you like to come in? Yes, I need to apologize. We all need to apologize. Throughout the day, other neighbors appeared. Mr. Harold, Mrs. Betty, and many other people who had criticized Margaret in the previous weeks. Mrs. Margaret, I feel ashamed, said Mrs. Betty. You are a heroine, and we treated you like a crazy person. You couldn't have known, replied Margaret, moved by the change in attitude. I had never told anyone. But you should have told us, insisted Mr. Harold. What you did is wonderful, training dogs to help blind people. That's saints' work. Don't exaggerate, Harold. I just did what I thought was right. All Sunday long, Margaret's house received visitors, people who wanted to apologize, others who wanted to know the story, and some who simply wanted to thank her for work they didn't know existed. One of the most moving visits was from a 75-year-old woman named Eleanor, accompanied by her daughter. Mrs. Margaret, my name is Eleanor. My daughter Karen lost her sight 10 years ago. You trained her guide dog, Buddy. Margaret remembered immediately. Of course, Buddy. How is he? Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he lived a full life helping my daughter with everything. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Margaret, when Buddy died, my daughter cried for weeks. He wasn't just a guide dog. He was part of the family, a true angel. Would you like... Margaret hesitated. Would you like him to be buried here with the others? Eleanor began to cry. You would do that for us? Of course. It would be an honor. That's how Margaret discovered she wasn't alone in her veneration for those special dogs. Other families also held precious memories of dogs she had trained, and many would like to have a special place to honor their memory. On Monday, Margaret received a call that completely surprised her. Mrs. Margaret, this is Mayor Anthony Coates. Mayor? Yes, I read the article in the newspaper. I spoke with Sarah Henderson, and I need to speak with you personally. May I visit you this afternoon? Of course, Mayor. At 4 in the afternoon, an official car stopped in front of Margaret's house. The mayor got out accompanied by 2 aides and a city engineer. Mrs. Margaret, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. Sarah told me your story, and I am deeply impressed. Thank you, Mayor. I came here for 2 things. First, to apologize on behalf of the city for the difficulties you have faced, and second, to propose a solution to the licensing issue. Margaret was surprised. What kind of solution? How about we turn your property into an official memorial, a place dedicated to the memory of guide dogs with public recognition of the importance of your work? Official memorial? Yes. The city would regularize all the construction, including the fence. It would create a commemorative plaque, a small garden, maybe even a bench where people can sit and reflect. Margaret looked at Sarah, who was present for the meeting. And what would that mean for me? It would mean you could continue living here normally, but your property would have the status of a public memorial. People could visit, learn the history, understand the importance of the work you have done. But I don't want to become a tourist attraction. It wouldn't be that, Mrs. Margaret, Sarah interjected. It would be a place for reflection, for education, a place where people would learn about the importance of guide dogs and about volunteer work. The mayor nodded. Exactly, an educational memorial. And of course you would have full control over how visits would be organized. Margaret thought for a few moments. The idea was tempting, but also frightening. I need to think. Of course, Mrs. Margaret, but I can tell you that the city is excited about the possibility. Sarah even suggested the creation of a guide dog training center here in Aspen, using your experience as a foundation. Training center? It would be a way to continue your work, but now with official support and proper resources, you could train other people, expand the project. Sarah leaned forward. Mrs. Margaret, imagine how many people we could help, how many dogs we could train if we had resources and official support. The proposal was grand, much bigger than Margaret had ever imagined. Part of her was excited about the possibilities, but another part was afraid that it would all get out of her control. Can I give an answer next week? Of course, Mrs. Margaret. There's no rush. After the mayor left, Margaret and Sarah kept talking in the garden. Sarah, do you think I should accept? I think you should follow your heart. What is it saying? Margaret looked at her fence, now almost finished. Then she looked at the corner of the yard where her special dogs rested. My heart says it would be good. That Max and the others would be happy to know their memory is being honored. Then that's the answer. That night, Margaret received a call from David. Mom, I read the newspaper article. I need to apologize. Hi, son. Mom, I didn't know. Why did you never tell me about the work with the dogs? Because I thought you wouldn't understand. Wouldn't understand, Mom? This is wonderful. You should be proud of it. I am proud, David, but I never did it for recognition. I know, Mom, and that makes it all even more special. You're a heroine. Don't exaggerate, son. I'm not exaggerating, and I want to apologize for threatening to have you committed. I was completely wrong. You were worried. I can understand. Mom, Jennifer and I talked. We'd like to come there next weekend and bring Emily too. She really wants to apologize to Grandma. Margaret smiled. It was the first time in weeks she had smiled genuinely. It will be so good to have you all. Mum, one last thing. About that proposal from the mayor that Sarah mentioned. If you decide to accept it, you can count on our full support. Thank you, son. That means a lot to me. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The following week, several things happened that solidified the change in Margaret's life. First, Frank and his team finished the fence. The work turned out even more imposing than Margaret had imagined. 10 feet high of perfectly aligned logs, forming solid protection around the entire property. Mrs. Margaret, it was a pleasure working on this project, said Frank. In 20 years in the business, I've never been part of anything so special. Thank you, Frank. You did a perfect job. And you, Mrs. Margaret, are a special person. I hope many people come here to learn your story. Second, dozens of letters arrived from all over the country. The newspaper article had been reproduced in other outlets, and Margaret's story had spread far beyond Aspen. One of the letters that touched Margaret the most was from a woman in Portland. "Mrs. Margaret, my name is Sandra, and I am 45 years old. I have been blind since I was 20, the victim of an accident. My guide dog, trained by people like you, changed my life completely. It allowed me to be independent, to work, to start a family. Today I am a mother of 2 and have a full professional career. None of this would be possible without people like you, who dedicate their lives to training these 4-legged angels. Thank you for existing. Thank you for making a difference." Another letter came from New York. "Dear Mrs. Margaret, I am a veterinarian and work with dog training. I read your story and was moved. It is rare to find people who do this work with so much love and dedication. You are an example to all of us. If you ever want to share your knowledge with us here in New York, you will be most welcome." More letters arrived daily, from grateful people, from professionals in the field, from admirers of the story. Margaret was moved by each one. Third, Sarah organized a special event for that Friday. A small concert at the City Theatre, where she would play the piano in honor of Margaret and the work of the guide dogs. "Mrs. Margaret, it will be a benefit concert. The proceeds will be used to create the training center we talked about. Sarah, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. And I want to. You deserve to be honored." On Friday night, the theatre was packed. Margaret arrived accompanied by David, Jennifer, and Emily, who had finally overcome her shame and now showed herself to be proud of her grandmother. "Grandma, I wanted to apologize," said Emily before the concert began. "I was very cruel to you." "You're a teenager, dear. It's normal to have those reactions." "That's no excuse. I should have asked. I should have tried to understand. Now that I know the truth, I am so proud of you." The concert was moving. Sarah played classical pieces with a mastery that left the entire audience enthralled. Between songs, she shared excerpts from Margaret's story and the importance of guide dogs. "This next piece," Sarah said before playing the final song, "is special to me. It's called For Max, and I composed it in honor of the dog who saved and changed my life. Max is buried in Mrs. Margaret's backyard, along with other 4-legged heroes. Mrs. Margaret built a fence around the house, not out of eccentricity, but out of love, out of respect, out of gratitude." The music Sarah played was of an indescribable beauty. Margaret cried throughout the entire performance, moved not only by the tribute, but by the extraordinary talent of that young woman she had helped years ago. At the end of the concert, Sarah called Margaret to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Margaret Henderson, a silent heroine who changed the lives of dozens of people. Let's give her the recognition she deserves." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted almost 5 minutes. Margaret, embarrassed by so much attention, waved timidly, but inside she was deeply moved. After the concert, many people came to greet her. Some were people she had helped years ago, others were simply admirers of her story. "Mrs. Margaret," said a 60-year-old woman, "my name is Beatrice. I work for an NGO supporting the blind in New York. We would very much like to invite you to give talks about your work." "Talks?" "Yes. Share your experience, teach others how to train guide dogs. Your expertise is very valuable. I don't know if I'm cut out for public speaking. I'm sure you are. You speak from the heart, and that's what matters most." Other people made similar invitations. Universities that wanted her participation in courses, NGOs interested in her knowledge, even a television channel that wanted to make a documentary about her life. Margaret was impressed by the response, but also a little frightened. Her quiet, reserved life had completely transformed. The following Saturday, she received the most special visit of all. It was a sunny morning when she heard voices on the street. She looked out the window and saw a group of about 20 people standing in front of her house. Men, women, and children of various ages, all accompanied by guide dogs. Margaret quickly went outside. "Good morning. Can I help you?" A woman stepped forward from the group. "Mrs. Margaret, we are from the Association for the Blind of New York. We've come to pay tribute to you." "Tribute?" "Yes. We discovered that many of our guide dogs were trained by you over the years. We want to thank you in person." Margaret was moved. She recognized some of the dogs she had trained years ago, now older but still active in their work. "This is Prince," said a 40-year-old man. "You trained him for me 5 years ago. He completely changed my life." "And this is Luna," said a young woman. "Thanks to her, I was able to finish college, and today I'm a teacher." One by one, the visitors told their stories, how the dogs trained by Margaret had transformed their lives, given them independence, made dreams possible. "Mrs. Margaret," said the association's representative, "we want to make an official proposal. We would like you to become a permanent consultant for our organization, help train new instructors, share your experience. But I'm getting too old for this work." "Old? You have unique experience. 25 years training dogs, dozens of success stories. That knowledge cannot be lost. And it wouldn't be heavy physical work," another person added. "It would be more about supervision, guidance, knowledge transfer." Margaret looked at those people, at those dogs, and felt a deep emotion. Her life had gained an even greater purpose than she had imagined. "Would you like to see the cemetery?" she asked. "Very much," they replied in unison. Margaret led them to the back of the yard. When they reached the place where the dogs were buried, silence fell. Many visitors were moved to see the small, colorful stones marking each grave. "Here is Max," said Margaret, pointing to the center. "He saved Sarah 16 years ago. And here is Duke," she pointed to another grave. "He accompanied Mr. Oswald for 12 years until the end of his life. And this is Princess," she continued. "She was the guide dog for a teacher who now runs a special school." Each grave had a story. Each dog had been special in someone's life. The visitors listened in respectful silence, some crying with emotion. "Mrs. Margaret," said the representative of the association, "this place is truly sacred. The fence you built is not just physical protection, it's spiritual protection." "That's exactly it," agreed Margaret. "And about the mayor's proposal to turn this into an official memorial?" "I'm still thinking. If I may offer an opinion, I think it would be wonderful. A place where future generations could learn about the importance of guide dogs, about volunteer work, about people like you." That afternoon, after the visitors had left, Margaret sat in the garden to reflect on everything that had happened. 3 months ago, she was a retired woman living discreetly in Aspen. Now she was a public figure, with invitations to give talks, job proposals, and even a memorial in her honor. The transformation had been radical, yet, at the same time, natural. Her passion for guide dogs, which she had kept secret for decades, was now being recognized and valued. Her phone rang. It was Sarah. "Mrs. Margaret, how was the association's visit?" "Emotional, Sarah. Very emotional. And have you decided about the mayor's proposal yet?" Margaret looked at her fence, now completely finished. She looked at the corner of the yard where her special dogs rested. She thought of all the people she had helped, of all the lives that had been transformed. "Sarah, I've decided. I will accept the mayor's proposal." "That's wonderful. I'm sure it's the right decision. But with a few conditions. I want you to help me organize everything, and I want it done with respect, with dignity." "Of course, Mrs. Margaret, it will be perfect." "Sarah?" "Yes. Thank you. For everything. For coming here. For telling the truth. For changing my life." "Mrs. Margaret, the one who changed my life was you. 16 years ago, when you gave me Max. Now it's just my turn to give back." The following Sunday, Margaret called the mayor. "Mayor Coates, this is Margaret Henderson. I've thought about your proposal. And I accept, but I would like to discuss the details." "Of course. How about Monday morning?" "Perfect." On Monday, the mayor arrived with his team, an architect and Sarah. They spent the whole morning planning what the memorial would be like. "The idea is to keep the fence exactly as it is," explained the architect. "It's already perfect as protection. We'll just add a more elegant main entrance, an explanatory plaque, and some benches in the garden. And a small kiosk where Mrs. Margaret can receive visitors and tell the story," added the mayor. "I don't want anything too flashy," said Margaret. "It has to be discreet, respectful." "It will be, Mrs. Margaret," Sarah assured her. "It will be an educational memorial, not an amusement park. The project was approved unanimously by the City Council the following week. The construction of the improvements would begin in a month, and the official inauguration was scheduled for 3 months later. During this period, Margaret's life continued to change. She accepted a few invitations to give lectures, always accompanied by Sarah. She discovered she really had a knack for public speaking, especially when talking about something she loved. Her first lecture was at a veterinary university in New York. The auditorium was packed with students interested in learning about guide dog training. "I am not a learned person," Margaret began. "I don't have a university degree, I don't have academic titles, but I have 25 years of practical experience and a lot of love for what I do." The audience was in total silence throughout the entire presentation. Margaret spoke about training techniques, the importance of patience, and how to understand each dog's personality. "The secret," she said at the end, "isn't just in the technical training. It's in the love. A guide dog isn't just a trained animal, it's a companion, a friend, a protector. If you don't understand that, you'll never be good trainers." The ovation was deafening. Students lined up to speak with her. Professors asked for her participation in other events. "Mrs. Henderson," said the course coordinator, "you have a natural gift for teaching. Would you consider giving a regular course here at the university?" "A regular course?" "Yes, a specialization in guide dog training. With your practical experience and our academic support, we could train excellent professionals." Margaret was tempted but gave it careful thought. "I need to think. My priority right now is the memorial and the training center in Aspen." "Of course, but when you're ready to expand, we'll be here." Back in Aspen, Margaret found a town that treated her completely differently. Where there had once been mockery, there was now respect. Where there had once been isolation, there was now admiration. "Mrs. Henderson!" shouted Mrs. Dorothy from her window. "How was the lecture in New York?" "It was good, Dorothy. Very good. You've become a celebrity. You were even on television." It was true. Margaret's story had gained national attention. Newspapers across the country had reprinted her story, and a television channel had done a special report on guide dog work. But despite all the attention, Margaret kept her feet on the ground. Every morning, she continued her routine. Wake up early, have coffee, go check on the dog cemetery. It was on one of these mornings that something happened that moved her deeply. She was in the backyard, organizing the small colored stones, when she heard voices on the street. But they weren't adult voices. They were children's voices. She looked over the fence and saw a group of students apparently on a school trip. The teacher was explaining the history of Mrs. Henderson's house. "Children, a very special lady lives here. She spent her whole life helping blind people, training special dogs for them." "What kind of dogs?" asked a child. "Guide dogs. They are dogs trained to guide people who cannot see." "And why did she build such a high fence?" asked another. "To protect the place where the special dogs are buried. It's like a cemetery, but only for dogs who were heroes." "Can I see?" asked a little girl. "Not today, dear. But soon this place will become a memorial, and then we can visit more calmly." Margaret watched the scene, moved. Her actions were now inspiring even the town's children. She made a decision. She opened the gate and went out to speak to the group. "Good morning. Are you from the municipal school?" "We are," replied the teacher, visibly excited. "Mrs. Henderson, what an honor to meet you in person." "The pleasure is mine. Would you like to see the cemetery?" The children were thrilled. "May we?" asked the teacher. "Of course. Come on in, everyone." Margaret led the group to the back of the yard. The children were impressed by the organization and care with which each grave was maintained. "This one here is Max," explained Margaret, pointing to the central grave. "He saved a little girl many years ago." "How did he save her?" asked a curious boy. "She was about to be hit by a truck and Max pushed her out of the way. The truck hit Max, but the little girl was okay." "And where is the little girl now?" asked a little girl. "She grew up and became a pianist. Do you know Sarah, who played at the theater last week?" "I do. My mum took me," said one child. "Right. That was her. Max saved her life." The children were utterly amazed. To them, it was almost a fairy tale. "Mrs. "Margaret," said the teacher, "would you be willing to come to the school to tell your story to other classes?" Of course, it would be a pleasure. And so Margaret discovered yet another calling, telling stories to children. In the following weeks, she visited several schools in the area, always talking about the importance of guide dogs and about values like generosity and volunteer work. The children loved her stories, and she discovered she had a special way of talking to them. During this period, the construction of the memorial improvements progressed rapidly. The main entrance had gained an elegant wooden gate with a discreet plaque, Guide Dog Memorial, in honor of the four-legged heroes and the work of Margaret Henderson. The garden had been reorganized with wooden benches and a small gazebo where Margaret could receive visitors. Everything was done with great taste and respect for the natural environment. Sarah oversaw every stage of the construction, ensuring everything was done as planned. "Mrs. Margaret, it's turning out beautiful, much better than I imagined." "It really is, and you respected my condition to keep everything discreet." "Of course. The idea is for it to be a place for reflection, not a circus." 2 weeks before the inauguration, Margaret received an unexpected visit that moved her deeply. It was a Thursday afternoon when Frank, the former construction foreman, appeared at her door accompanied by a woman and a child. "Mrs. Margaret, this is my wife, Rebecca, and my daughter, Isabel. Nice to meet you. Please come in." "Mrs. Margaret," said Rebecca, "Frank told me the whole story of the construction, about how you were misunderstood about the true reason for the fence. And I wanted to apologize. I was one of the people who wrote those anonymous letters criticizing you." Margaret was surprised. She didn't expect someone to confess that in person. "Rebecca, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. I was unfair, prejudiced. I judged you without knowing the truth." "It's all right. You couldn't have known." Frank stepped forward. "Mrs. Margaret, Rebecca came here because she wants to do something to make up for the mistake." "What kind of thing?" "I work in gardening," explained Rebecca. "I would like to take care of the memorial garden free of charge, as a way to ask for forgiveness and to contribute to this beautiful project." Margaret was moved by the gesture. "That would be wonderful, Rebecca, thank you." "And Isabel," said Frank, pointing to his 12-year-old daughter, "has a question to ask." The girl stepped forward timidly. "Mrs. Margaret, can I help take care of the colored stones? My dad told me each one marks the place of a special dog." "Of course you can, dear. It would be an honor to have your help." And so Margaret gained another family of supporters. Rebecca became responsible for maintaining the garden, and Isabel came every Saturday to help clean and organize the small stones that marked the graves. The girl fell in love with the story of each dog, and Margaret found in her an attentive and curious listener. "Mrs. Margaret, how did you know a dog would be a good guide?" "Observing his behavior, dear. The intelligence, the obedience, the ability to concentrate." "And did it take long to train them?" "It depended on the dog. Some learned in 6 months, others needed more than a year." "Do you miss training dogs?" "I do, but now I am preparing to teach other people to do it." The official memorial inauguration was scheduled for a Saturday in November. Sarah had organized a simple but moving ceremony. "Mrs. Margaret, people from various cities are coming. Representatives from associations for the blind, veterinarians, dog trainers, authorities." "Won't it be too busy?" "Don't worry, it will be a respectful ceremony. And after that, visits will be organized and controlled." During the week of the inauguration, Margaret received dozens of affectionate messages, letters from grateful people, telegrams from authorities, even a message from the state governor congratulating the initiative. But the message that moved her the most came from far away. It was an international envelope coming from Canada. "Dear Mrs. Margaret, my name is Anthony Woods, and I live in Toronto. I read about your story on the internet and was deeply touched. I also work with guide dogs here in Canada, and I would like to invite you to see our work. People like you are rare in the world, and it would be an honor to have you here. If you ever want to take an international trip, our organization will cover everything. A big hug from a Portuguese admirer." The idea of traveling abroad frightened Margaret, but at the same time intrigued her. Perhaps, who knows, in the future. On the Saturday of the inauguration, Margaret woke up with butterflies in her stomach. It was a beautiful sunny day, perfect for the ceremony. She put on her best clothes and went out to check the final details. The garden was impeccable, thanks to Rebecca's work. The colored stones were all clean and organized, thanks to Isabel's dedication. Sarah arrived early to help with the final preparations. "Mrs. Margaret, everything is perfect. How are you feeling?" "Nervous, very nervous." "That's normal, but everything will be fine. You deserve all this tribute." The first guests began to arrive at 10 in the morning. The mayor came accompanied by his entire team. Then the representatives from associations for the blind from various cities arrived. Margaret was moved to see so many people with their guide dogs coming to the ceremony. Some were dogs she herself had trained years ago. David, Jennifer, and Emily arrived from New York, bringing flowers for the ceremony. Emily was visibly proud of her grandmother. "Grandma, I'm so happy. You deserve all this recognition." "Thank you, dear. It's good to have you here." At 11 o'clock, the ceremony officially began. The mayor gave an emotional speech about the importance of volunteer work and the dedication of people like Margaret. "Today we inaugurate not just a memorial, but a symbol, the symbol that one person, with love and dedication, can transform dozens of lives." Sarah spoke next, telling her own story and the importance of Max in her life. "This place is sacred not because it has graves, but because it holds the memory of lives dedicated to love and service. Max, who is buried here, gave me not just security and independence, he gave me life." When it was Margaret's turn to speak, she was visibly emotional. "I never expected my life to take this direction," she began. "For decades, I trained guide dogs in silence, without expecting recognition. I did it because I believed in the importance of the work." She looked at the audience, who listened to her in respectful silence. "This fence I built was not the eccentricity of a crazy old lady. It was love. It was respect. It was gratitude for all these dogs who dedicated their lives to helping other people. Max, Duke, Princess, Buddy, and so many others buried here were much more than pets. They were silent heroes who changed human lives. Today, this memorial is not just a tribute to them. It is a commitment that their stories will not be forgotten, and that the work of training guide dogs will continue to grow and help more people." The ovation was long and emotional. Many people cried, moved by the simplicity and depth of Margaret's words. After the speeches, the guests visited the cemetery. Each grave was explained, each story was told. Many people laid flowers on the small colored stones. Her particularly emotional moment was when Eleanor, Karen's mother, brought Buddy's ashes to be buried with the other dogs. "Buddy will be in good company," she said, crying, "among heroes like him." The ceremony ended with Sarah playing For Max on the small piano that had been brought especially for the occasion. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. In the late afternoon, when all the guests had left, Margaret stayed alone in the garden with Sarah. "Sarah, thank you for everything, for making this possible. Thank you, Mrs. Margaret, for giving me a life, for showing me what unconditional love is." They stood in silence, contemplating the transformation that had taken place. The fence that months ago was a subject of mockery now protected a respected and admired memorial. "Mrs. Margaret?" "Yes?" "What comes next?" Margaret smiled. "Now comes the best part, the training center. We're going to teach other people to do what we did. We're going to multiply the love." In the following months, the memorial became a landmark in Aspen. It received visitors from all over the country, always in small, organized groups, respecting the tranquility of the place. Margaret discovered she really enjoyed receiving people, telling the stories, educating about the importance of guide dogs. Each visit was an opportunity to spread knowledge and raise awareness for the cause. The training center also began to take shape. The City Hall provided a plot of land near the memorial, where a suitable structure for training new dogs and instructing new trainers would be built. Sarah secured donations from companies and individuals to fund the project. In 6 months, the center would be ready to operate. "Mrs. Margaret, we secured funding to train 20 instructors in the first year," Sarah announced happily. 20? That's an ambitious number. but necessary. The demand is enormous. There are thousands of visually impaired people in the United States waiting for a guide dog. Then let's work hard to serve them. Margaret also accepted the proposal from the university in New York to teach a specialization course. Once a month, she traveled to the city to teach future veterinarians and biologists about guide dog training. Her classes were always in high demand. Students from various universities came to attend, drawn not only by the technical knowledge, but by the human experience Margaret brought. What you need to understand, she would say in her classes, is that training a guide dog is not just teaching commands. It's creating a connection, a bond of trust and love that will last a lifetime. A poorly trained guide dog can be dangerous, but a well-trained guide dog with love and dedication can be the difference between dependence and freedom for a person. The students always asked many questions, curious about specific techniques, special cases, training challenges. "Professor Margaret," a student asked in one of the classes, "what was the most difficult case you ever faced?" Margaret thought for a moment. "It was a dog named Zeus. He was extremely intelligent, but very stubborn. It took me nearly 2 years to train him properly." "And was it worth it?" "It was. Zeus accompanied a university professor for 15 years. That professor, with Zeus's help, wrote 3 books and taught hundreds of students, a whole life of productivity and achievement that wouldn't have been possible without that stubborn dog." Stories like this inspired the students and showed them the importance of the work they were learning to do. In December, a year after the whole controversy began, Margaret received an honor she hadn't expected. The state governor came personally to Aspen to present her with the title of Distinguished Citizen of the State. "Mrs. Margaret Henderson," the governor said at the ceremony, "is an example of how an ordinary person can do extraordinary things. Your dedication to guide dogs and people with visual impairments is a model for all of us." The tribute was broadcast on state television, and Margaret's story gained even more national recognition. But for her, the true reward was in the small moments of everyday life, in the thank you letters she kept receiving, in the visits from people who had been helped by her dogs, in the joy of Isabel tending to the colorful stones every Saturday. One summer afternoon, Margaret was in the garden when she received a very special visit. It was an 8-year-old girl, blind since birth, accompanied by her parents. "Mrs. Margaret, this is our daughter Sophia," said the father. "We heard about your work and came to see if you could train a guide dog for her." Margaret looked at the little girl, who held her mother's hand with confidence. "Hi, Sophia. How are you?" "I'm good," the child replied with a beautiful smile. "Mommy said you train very special dogs." "I do. And what kind of dog would you like to have?" "One that's my best friend. One that helps me go to school, play in the park, be independent." Margaret felt her heart warm. This was it. It was for children like Sophia that she had dedicated her life to this work. "You know what, Sophia? I know exactly the perfect dog for you. He's being trained right now at our new center." "Really? What's he like?" "He's a golden Labrador like Max was. Smart, affectionate, very obedient. And you know what else? He loves children." "When can I meet him?" "In a few months. But first, you'll have to learn some things too. To be a guide dog partner, you need to prepare." "I can learn. I'm very smart." Margaret smiled. Sophia reminded her of Sarah when she was a child. The same determination, the same joy for life, despite the difficulties. "I'm sure you can. And you know what else? You can come visit me every week so we can learn together." "I really can. You can. It will be a pleasure to have you here." While Sophia's parents talked about practical details, the girl asked to see the memorial. "Mrs. Margaret, can I touch the colorful stones?" "You can, dear, but carefully. Each one represents a very special dog." Sophia gently ran her hands over the stones, touching each one with reverence. "This one is different from the others," she said, stopping at Max's stone. "Yes, it is. That's Max's, a very special dog who saved a little girl a long time ago." "Where is the little girl now?" "She grew up and became a famous pianist. Her name is Sarah Henderson. I want to meet her." "You can. She visits me often." Sophia smiled. "Mrs. Margaret, one day will I have a hero dog like Max too?" Margaret knelt beside the girl. Sophia, every guide dog is a hero. They dedicate their whole lives to caring for their human partners. The dog I'm training for you will be your own personal hero. And when he gets old, will he come to rest here with the others? If you want him to, yes. I want him to, so he can be near his friends. That night, Margaret called Sarah to tell her about Sophia. Sarah, today I met a little girl who reminded me so much of you. How so? Same age you were when you met Max, same determined personality, same beautiful smile. And are you going to train a dog for her? I am. In fact, I'm already training one. He's a golden Labrador named Hector. How wonderful. And when will they meet? In 3 months. Hector will be ready. Can I follow this process? Since I was a child, I've been curious to see how the training works. Of course. In fact, how about you help with the musical training? Musical training? It's a technique I've developed over the years. I use music to help the dogs understand rhythm, timing, coordination. You could play the piano during some sessions. It would be my pleasure. What a fantastic idea. And so began a new phase in Margaret's work, with Sarah helping with musical techniques, with the new training center running at full capacity, and with a new generation of instructors being trained. Sophia became a constant presence at the memorial. Every Wednesday she would come to observe Hector's training, learning the commands, developing the necessary confidence. Sophia, now you're going to hold the leash and walk with Hector, Margaret instructed during a session. May I? You may, trust him. He already knows how to protect you. The girl held the leash confidently and took her first steps accompanied by Hector. The dog guided her perfectly, stopping at every obstacle, waiting for her commands. He's perfect, exclaimed Sophia. It's as if he knows exactly what I'm thinking. That's how a good partnership works, explained Margaret. You two become a team. Sarah, who was observing the session, played a soft melody on the portable piano she had brought. Hector reacted to the music, synchronizing his steps with the rhythm. Incredible, said Sophia. He's dancing with me. That's the musical training, explained Sarah. It helps with coordination and the emotional bond. That scene with Sophia walking confidently guided by Hector, with Sarah playing piano in the background, and Margaret overseeing everything with a proud smile, perfectly summarized what had happened in Aspen. A fence that had begun as a source of controversy had transformed into a symbol of love and dedication. A lady who had been considered crazy had proven to be a quiet heroine. A work that was kept secret had become an inspiration for hundreds of people. 6 months later, the day of Sophia and Hector's graduation arrived. The ceremony took place at the memorial, attended by authorities, the press, and dozens of people who had followed the process. Today, said Margaret at the opening of the ceremony, we are not just delivering a guide dog. We are delivering independence, freedom, and a companion for life. Sophia, now 9 years old, was visibly moved. Hector, do you promise to take care of me always? The dog responded with a soft bark, as if he understood the question perfectly. He promised, said Sophia, laughing. During the ceremony, Sarah played a special piece she had composed for the occasion, for Hector and Sophia, a joyful and hopeful melody that represented the beginning of a new adventure. At the end, the mayor presented an official certificate recognizing Hector as a guide dog graduated from the Margaret Henderson Training Center. Sophia, said the mayor, you and Hector are now ambassadors of our city. You will show the world that here in Aspen we do extraordinary things. We will, replied Sophia, petting Hector. Right, my friend? 3 years have passed since that ceremony. The Margaret Henderson Training Center has become a national reference, having graduated over 50 guide dogs and trained 20 specialized instructors. Sarah moved permanently to Aspen, where she opened a music school specially adapted for people with visual impairments. Sophia became one of the first students at the school, revealing an impressive talent for the piano. With Hector always by her side, she participated in performances and competitions, inspiring other children with disabilities. Isabel, now 15, decided she wants to be a veterinarian and specialize in guide dog training. Every Saturday she still helps Margaret care for the memorial, now with the responsibility of guiding visitors and telling the stories of the dogs. The memorial receives about 200 visits per month, always organized and respectful. It has become a mandatory stop for schools in the region and a point of tourist interest in Aspen. David and Jennifer moved to Aspen, where David opened an engineering office and Jennifer works as a volunteer at the training center. Emily, now 19, studies veterinary medicine in New York, but always returns on weekends to help her grandmother. Margaret, at 71, remains active and full of projects. In addition to supervising the training center and giving regular lectures, she is writing a book about her experiences with guide dogs. It's so other people can learn, she explains, so this knowledge isn't lost. One autumn afternoon, Margaret was in the memorial garden when she received an unexpected visitor. It was Andrew Mitchell, the journalist who had written the first mocking article about her. "Mrs. Henderson, I've come with a proposal." "What kind of proposal, Andrew?" "I would like to write a book about your story, from the beginning to the end, from building the fence until today." "A book?" "Yes. Your story deserves to be known by more people. It's a story of overcoming, of love, of how one person can change the world around them." Margaret thought for a few moments. "Would you write the whole truth, including the bad part when everyone criticized me?" "Especially the bad part. That's what makes your story even more powerful. How you overcame everything and turned criticism into recognition. And what would you do with the money from the book sales?" "We would split it. Half for me, half for the training center." Margaret smiled. It was a fair proposal that would benefit her cause. "I accept, Andrew. But on one condition." "What?" "Sarah has to participate in the writing. She knows the story better than anyone." "Perfect. It will be even better. The book took a year to write." Andrew interviewed dozens of people involved in the story, neighbors, authorities, people who were helped by Margaret, even Frank and his family. Sarah contributed the most emotional aspects of the narrative, ensuring the story was told with the sensitivity it deserved. When the book was launched, with the title The Fence of Love, The True Story of Margaret Henderson and Her Guide Dogs, it became an immediate success. The launch signing was in Aspen itself at the memorial. Hundreds of people came from various cities to meet Margaret and buy the signed book. "Mrs. Henderson," said one reader, "your story changed my life. I started doing volunteer work after reading about you." "That's wonderful," replied Margaret. "The world needs more people willing to help." "Do you have any advice for someone who wants to start? Start small, do what is within your reach. What matters is not the grandeur of the gesture, but the sincerity of the heart." The success of the book brought even more recognition for Margaret. She was invited to television programs, national conferences, and even to an international event about guide dogs in Europe. "Mrs. Henderson," said Sarah, "do you remember that letter you received from Canada?" "I remember. They called today. They want you to be the keynote speaker at the European Guide Dog Congress." "In Europe?" "In Toronto. All expenses paid, simultaneous translation, and a significant speaking fee that can be donated to the center." Margaret was tempted, but also frightened by the scale of the invitation. "Sarah, do you think I should accept?" "I think you deserve this opportunity, and the world deserves to know your work. But what if I don't know how to speak to an international audience?" "Mrs. Henderson, you speak from the heart. It doesn't matter the nationality of the listener. Everyone understands the heart." 2 weeks later, Margaret was on a plane to Europe. Sarah Henderson accompanied her, serving as translator and emotional support. It was her first international trip at 71 years old. She was impressed with Toronto, with the receptiveness of the Canadians, and with the level of organization of the event. "Mrs. Henderson," said Anthony Woods, the man who had written her the first letter, "it's an honor to have you here. You are a legend in our field." "A legend? I'm just a lady who likes dogs." "You are much more than that. You are an example of dedication and love for others." The Congress had participants from 15 European countries. Margaret lectured about her training techniques, about the importance of volunteer work, and about the history of the memorial. "When I started training guide dogs 40 years ago," she said to a packed auditorium. "I never imagined it would become my life's mission. I started out of curiosity, continued out of passion, and today I know it was my purpose." The audience listened in respectful silence, many moved by the simplicity and depth of her words. A fence that seemed like madness became a symbol of protection and love. A secret passion became public inspiration. A quiet life gained a voice to teach and inspire. The ovation was warm and prolonged. Several participants approached her afterward to exchange experiences and extend invitations to other events. "Mrs. Henderson," said a French trainer, "you have changed my way of seeing this work. Thank you for the inspiration." "Mrs. Henderson," said a German researcher, "I would like to study your musical training techniques. May I visit you in the United States?" Margaret returned from the Congress even more motivated and full of new projects. She had established international partnerships, learned new techniques, and, most importantly, confirmed that her work had global relevance. On the last day of the year, Margaret was sitting in the Memorial Garden, reflecting on everything that had happened in her life. 5 years ago, she was a retired lady living discreetly in Aspen. Now she was an internationally recognized personality, a published author, a sought-after speaker, the director of a leading training center. But looking at the colored stones marking the graves of her special dogs, she knew that none of that mattered as much as the work itself, as much as the lives she had helped transform, as much as the love she had spread. Sarah arrived for the New Year's Eve dinner they had planned. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Henderson?" "Grateful, Sarah, very grateful." "For the recognition?" "For the recognition, yes, but mainly for the opportunity to have made a difference." They toasted with champagne in the garden, surrounded by the memories of the dogs who had dedicated their lives to helping others. "Mrs. Henderson, what is your biggest dream now?" Margaret thought for a few moments. "To see the work continue when I am no longer here. To know that other people will take care of this memorial, will train new guide dogs, will keep this mission of love alive." "That is already guaranteed, Mrs. Henderson. You have created something much bigger than you imagined." "I hope so, Sarah. I hope so." When midnight arrived, they heard fireworks from the city celebrating the new year. But there at the memorial, the celebration was silent and full of meaning. "Thank you, Max," whispered Margaret to the central grave. "Thank you for starting it all." As if understanding, Hector, who now accompanied Sophia on all special occasions, gave a soft bark and lay down beside Max's grave. It was his way of paying tribute to the predecessor, the dog who had paved the way for all the others. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of overcoming and love? Margaret teaches us that sometimes we are misunderstood when we fight for something we truly believe in, but persistence and true love always find a way to shine. Tell us in the comments if you've ever been through a similar situation where you were judged before people knew your true motives. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories that celebrate the strength of love and dedication.